All right, let's dive right into this explainer. When we hear the name Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, I bet our minds almost instantly jump to the 17th century warrior king, right? We picture the brilliant military tactician standing absolutely defiant against the sprawling Mughal Empire. But today, we're going to pivot and explore a completely different and arguably much more impactful side of his rule. We're looking past the sword to examine the visionary state builder, a leader whose administrative genius literally holds incredible lessons for us even today. So think about it for a second. We all know the epic stories of daring guerrilla warfare, but that raises a really vital question. Is a lasting legacy built purely on military conquest? I mean, history is just littered with conquerors whose massive empires crumbled the very second they died. For a legacy to actually last centuries, it requires way more than just military might. It needs a rock-solid foundation of governance. And this right here illustrates the major paradigm shift we're exploring today. We're moving away from that traditional myth of the solitary warrior king and unpacking the reality that modern historical research shows us. We're looking at a progressive state builder who championed inclusive governance, totally decentralized his administration, and demanded ethical leadership. Actually, recent research from the International Journal of Advanced and Applied Research points this out perfectly. If we only focus on the soldier, we completely miss the brilliant socio-political mind behind the empire. By looking past the battlefield, we find a leader who worked tirelessly to support regional identities and strengthen the very fabric of society during an incredibly turbulent time. Okay, let's move right into Section 1, a master of statecraft. Here's the key thing. Shivaji didn't just conquer land and hoard the control. He decentralized his power. In an era where absolute monarchs, like his massive Mughal rivals, held an iron grip on literally every decision, he realized that empowering local leaders was the real secret to building regional resilience. He gave people a real stake in their own communities, allowing local economies and cultures to thrive under his protection. Now check this out. These core principles, which eminent historians like Jadunath Sarkar and Stuart Gordon have highlighted over the years, mirror modern public administration almost exactly. Transparency, participatory governance, social justice, accountability. These aren't just 21st century buzzwords. He was practically implementing them in the 1600s. He built a system where public service required absolute integrity. It was profoundly ahead of its time. This quote really nails it. Recent research confirms that these administrative reforms were just as crucial to the survival of the Maratha state as any physical fortress or navy. Without those robust systems of accountability and citizen-oriented policies, the empire simply wouldn't have had the structural integrity to withstand the relentless external pressures it was facing. All right, moving on to Section 2, inclusive and ethical leadership. It's absolutely wild when you think about it. But this merit-based system was a radical shock to the rigid social structures of the 17th century. In a society that was deeply, deeply entrenched in hierarchical caste systems, Shivaji actively integrated marginalized communities into his government. He was looking for skill, loyalty, and capability over rigid social standing. He essentially shattered the status quo of his era. When modern scholars examine his reign through various analytical lenses, they see a leader whose policy sparked massive socio-cultural transformations. He famously promoted religious tolerance to forge a unified Maratha identity from a highly fragmented population. And today, his era is even prompting modern feminist critiques, pushing us to explore the historically overlooked roles of women in his kingdom. The impact is incredibly multifaceted. And that brings us to this quote. It explains exactly why his legacy resonates so strongly with modern movements advocating for social equality. It wasn't about just ticking boxes or filling quotas, right? It was about acknowledging the dignity of everyday people and securing their fundamental right to actually participate in shaping their own society. Now let's look at Section 3, Evolution of a Legacy. We can actually trace how he evolved from a 17th century sovereign into a timeless symbol. It starts with practical, strategic moves, like taking Reigate Fort in 1670 for an administrative capital, and of course his coronation in 1674. But fast forward to the 19th and 20th centuries, and his historical defiance becomes this perfect inspirational blueprint for the Indian independence movement. And by 2018, with massive modern statues being unveiled, his status as a permanent cultural icon is completely cemented. So, objectively speaking, his image today is incredibly adaptable, utilized by various political and social groups to reinforce their own unique claims and historical narratives. During British rule, he was a unifier. During the independence movement, he was the ultimate anti-colonial resistor. Today, different political factions invoke his name for regional Marathi pride, while others adopt him as an ideological symbol for Hindu nationalism or point to him in debates about caste dynamics. Now, to be clear, we aren't here to endorse any of these modern political viewpoints, but simply to observe how powerfully his historical image is leveraged across the spectrum today. The big takeaway here is that historical memory is almost never static. It evolves to meet the needs of the present. Shivaji is no longer just a man in the history books. He is a highly dynamic concept of identity and power that contemporary society continues to mold, debate, and negotiate with. Which leads us to our final part, Section 4, Lessons for Modern Governance. Okay, this might actually surprise you, but researchers today are pointing to his decentralized, community-focused leadership as a literal model for executing modern initiatives, specifically in areas like public health. It turns out that when you empower local leaders and create an inclusive environment, just as he did, communities become significantly more resilient and cooperative. The practical application here is just amazing to me. Historical knowledge is directly informing modern policymaking. Research shows that by adopting culturally relevant leadership styles that are rooted in local identity and participatory governance, much like Shivaji's, policymakers today can actively improve health outcomes and foster deep social unity. It's a brilliant connection between a 17th century king and 21st century public welfare. So, these are the true, enduring lessons of Shivaji Maharaj, strategies that build trust, inclusivity, and long-lasting stability. Whether you're leading a nation, running a city council, or managing an organization, prioritizing ethical accountability and building resilience through local empowerment are universally effective principles. I'll leave you with this thought as we wrap up this explainer. History isn't just about memorizing the past. It's a blueprint for building a more unified and effective future. When we finally look past the mythology of the warrior king, we find a masterful administrator who understood that true power comes from lifting up your people. So, how can you apply a little bit of that 17th century wisdom to your own world today?